Tonight, did the Belgian authorities blunder? New claims that the security services ignored warnings about one of the Brussels bombers.
These people who did these attacks should have been on the radar of Belgian intelligence.
More of the faces and the stories of those caught up in the atrocity come to light.
He's an amazing man who deeply, deeply loves his son, and we all want to find him.
And Malcolm Turnbull taken to task for linking terrorism to the European migrant crisis.
We should be very careful not to equate terrorism and migration.
This is SBS World News with Anton Enos and Janice Peterson.
Good evening. More details are emerging of the intelligence blunders that contributed to the bomb attacks in Belgium. It's been revealed that Turkey had warned Belgium about one of the brothers who carried out the attack.
Belgium says its police had the pair marked down as petty criminals, despite the fact that Interpol had flagged one of the brothers as a terrorist in June last year. Well, let's cross live now to Brussels and our SBS reporter Ben Lewis. Ben, what's the latest on the manhunt tonight?
Janice, good evening. If there have been any major developments in the investigation overnight local time, Brussels prosecutors have not yet informed the public. However, it's understood that no new arrests have been made and there have been no new raids in the last few hours. EU interior ministers will be meeting here in Brussels tonight, as they did after the Paris attacks, to discuss ways to strengthen Europe's borders and deal with the threat of returning jihadis. Meanwhile, we now know much more about the suicide bombers as the hunt for the surviving attacker continues. The tributes continued throughout the night. In Place de la Bourse, the crowds grew.
Nous sommes tous solidarité.
Song giving way to anti-terrorist chants and spontaneous applause in a symbolic display of solidarity.
C'est juste pour partager ce qu'on ressent avec le reste avec les personnes qui sont présentes, tout simplement.
Earlier, a stark contrast, the nation observing a minute's silence.
Vive la Belgique!
The quiet broken. Long live Belgium. The country is now observing 3 days of mourning and enduring heightened security. This is something the people of Brussels are going to get used to seeing. Military officers searching bags on the way into metro stations and key government buildings. They're here to provide both security and reassurance, but the sense of fear in this community is still palpable. New video has emerged of the panic at Brussels airport. Passengers on the tarmac terrified at the sounds of the explosions. A massive manhunt continues for one unidentified suspect, pictured here on the right at the airport before the attack.
Troisième suspect, vêtu d'une veste claire et portant un chapeau, est en fuite. Il a déposé un grand sac, puis est parti avant les explosions. Son sac contenait la charge explosive la plus importante.
The man on the left is suspected master bomb maker Najim Lakhraoui. He's been linked to the Paris attacks and to Salah Abdeslam, the lone survivor of those attacks who was arrested last week in Brussels. The man in the middle, Ibrahim El Bakraoui. His brother Khalid carried out the metro attack. Belgian authorities say both were known as petty criminals, not terror suspects. However, last June, Interpol sent a worldwide alert about Khalid El Bakraoui, saying he was wanted in Belgium. And today, Turkey's president said his country had deported Ibrahim El Bakraoui and alerted Belgium that he was a militant, but no action was taken. It's also being reported the European Council had recently ordered Belgium to overhaul its border force because guards were failing to check suspicious passengers from high-risk countries. Attention also on the so-called bomb factory. In this apartment in Brussels, police found explosives like the ones used in Paris, as well as detonators and a suitcase full of screws and nails. Some of the material allegedly left behind because the bombers couldn't fit it in the taxi they took to the airport. They also found key evidence near the apartment.
Les enquêteurs ont trouvé un ordinateur contenant le testament de Ibrahim El Bakraoui, dans lequel il déclare, je cite, être dans la précipitation, ne plus savoir quoi faire, être recherché de partout, ne plus être en sécurité et que s'il s'éternise, il risque de terminer à côté de lui dans une cellule.
The King and Queen of Belgium visited both the airport and the metro to pay their respects. Flags are at half-mast in a country now very aware of how vulnerable it is. The identities of the victims are now emerging, and we're learning more about the injured and those who had miraculous escapes. The Belgian government says people from as many as 40 countries were caught up in the blasts. 61 people remain in hospital in a critical condition.
Bart Migham was on the train on the way to the airport to visit his girlfriend. They were texting, and then there was nothing.
It's been the worst days of my life. I guess I didn't know how much one person can love another until you just don't know where they're at.
David Dixon texted his aunt to tell her he was safe after the airport explosions, but then he caught the metro to work. His partner Charlotte has been searching the hospitals of Brussels ever since. The British couple have a 7-year-old son.
He's a lovely guy. He's an amazing man who deeply, deeply loves his son, and we all want to find him.
As do the families of Justin and Stephanie Schultz, Americans living in Belgium. They'd just dropped her mother at the airport. A family member tweeted that the US State Department had told him the couple had been found, only to have to retract that information hours later. New York brother and sister Alexander and Sasha Pinkovsky called their family from the airport. Then the phone line went dead. Alexander, engaged to be married, his fiancée's father on the way to Brussels to search.
You can never imagine that something like this would happen to your own daughter, your own family, and it's horrible beyond imagination.
And then there are the wounded. Brazilian-born basketball player Sebastian Bellin was thrown 20 metres by bomb blast. When he could, he called home.
His first words were, "Dad." And then he paused and he said, "You have no idea what I saw around me, the carnage." 3 Mormon missionaries were wounded.
So we received news that our son survived. And my heart goes out to those that received news that their son didn't survive or their family member didn't survive. I'm grateful that ours did.
So many did not. Leopold Hecht was 20 years old. He was studying law. And 37-year-old Peruvian Adelma Tapia Ruiz. She was at the airport with her husband and daughters.
She had twins called Maureen and Alondra. They were in the Brussels airport too. They were connecting through to New York to meet my sister Malenka. This attack stopped this destiny.
What the attack did not take was her family. The 4-year-olds had run off to play, their survival as random as the deaths of so many others. Pruluan, SBS World News.
Intelligence officials have warned that 400 Islamic State fighters have been trained to target European cities in waves of attacks. Countries right across this continent are now clamping down on security.
Overshadowing other foreign policy commitments, the Brussels bombings and the threat of further terror is taking centre stage.
I've got a lot of things on my plate, but my top priority is to defeat ISIL and to eliminate the scourge of this barbaric terrorism that's been taking place around the world.
It's also top of the agenda on the campaign trail. Donald Trump saying if made president, he'd bring back torture techniques and force the Islamic world to respect the West.
ISIS is an enemy. I don't rule out anything. I would say definitely nuclear weapons are a last resort.
Democrat frontrunner Hillary Clinton rejecting calls for more targeted local patrols.
For racially profiling predominantly Muslim neighborhoods. It's wrong, it's counterproductive, it's dangerous.
In Geneva, at talks to broker a Syrian peace, the United Nations and the EU pushed negotiators, saying there couldn't be a solution to fighting IS or Al-Qaeda without first finding a credible political solution in Syria.
It's for the region, but it's also for the Europeans, as you said, because the threat that is coming to Europe and elsewhere in the region and elsewhere in the world has clear connections also with the spread of Daesh.
Across the European Union, anxiety and solidarity. Borders tightened with additional officers on the German-Austrian frontier. In France, transport hubs being considered part of the front line.
C'est le même combat qui se mène ici à Roissy et qui se mène dans la bande sahélo-saharienne ou en Irak contre le même adversaire qui est Daesh.
Security upped in downtown Madrid, in Italy, even at the Vatican. The Pope denouncing the blasts as acts of abominable cruelty. Across the continent, leaders are calling for a European security pact. Several want the European Parliament to approve the establishment of a passenger name record, which would include names, itineraries, ticket details, means of payment, baggage information, even seat numbers for all travellers in the EU. Poland has said Warsaw now won't take its share of migrants agreed under an EU plan. Leaders are considering the future.
Vivre, oui, mais en intégrant cette menace terroriste, en intégrant ces actes de guerre que nous subissons, en n'oubliant pas que des jeunes, aujourd'hui, partent en Syrie pour combattre et demain retourner les armes contre leurs propres compatriotes.
A continent on edge, preparing to face down the threat. Nastasia Tay, SBS World News.
The suspected ringleader of the Paris terror attacks is due to appear here in court in Brussels in a few hours' time. Salah Abdeslam is facing murder and terrorism charges over the attacks in November in which 130 people died. He was captured last week during a police raid in Molenbeek. France is seeking his extradition so he can be tried there. It will be interesting too to see if he faces charges over the Brussels attacks given his apparent connections to the suicide bombers. Here in Place de la Bourse, the makeshift memorial keeps getting bigger. More flowers, more candles being lit overnight and more chalk messages. They're stretching quite some distance from the place now, and this is really the site for people to come together and share their grief because the airport is still shut to the public and there's still quite a large exclusion zone around the metro station. Anton and Janice will have the latest on the investigation in SBS Late News, but for now it's back to you in the studio.
SBS reporter Ben Lewis in Brussels, thanks so much for that update.